Welcome to The Freedom Experience, the podcast for business owners and CEOs who feel stuck, frustrated, or anxious about their company's growth. I'm your host, Jean Moncrieff, and each week I'll bring you insights from successful entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and expert coaches who've navigated the challenges of scaling a business. In each episode, we'll dive into their proven strategies, their systems, and their personal stories, sharing the hard-earned lessons that help them to break through barriers and build businesses of true value. If you're feeling like time's running out and you haven't created the impact or the freedom that you envisioned when you started your business, this podcast is your roadmap to intentional, purpose-driven growth. Join me and let's unlock the potential of your business together. Hey, so welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrieff, and this week, something a little bit different. I'm doing a solo episode. Over the years, I've built a number of successful companies. I've learned some hard lessons along the way from my own failures, and now I work with business owners to coach them to avoid doing the same thing. And part of the reason that this podcast was started was to interview successful business owners, to get them on the show, to help you to avoid some of those blind spots or the pitfalls that I found myself in. And I want to pause for a moment as we go into the new year and take some of those learnings and share them with you and kind of do a summary episode, or actually two summary episodes. So this is going to be part one. Part two will drop next week. And I want to take kind of the 6 big things that have come out of the past few podcast episodes and share those with you, and in the hope that they are going to help you as you go into the new year to really find that momentum that you've been looking for in your business. So today's episode is all about trying to help you regain momentum in your business, about getting clarity as you go into the new year. It's over the next 2 episodes, I'll share insights and practical tips from the podcasts that we've covered so far. But today is really about 3 key things that I want to cover with you. And the first one is this idea of a doom loop, the CEO doom loop, or the business owner doom loop that Glenn Dull introduced in the episode, and the links to those episodes at the back, at the bottom in the podcast notes. But so many of us get stuck in this kind of reactive leadership space, and I want to talk to you about how to break free from that. The second thing is about purpose, and I know this is one of those softer, touchy-feely type things, but in all the interviews I've done, purpose has been so important in building a business that has momentum, that kind of gives you as a business owner the kind of freedom that you're looking for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about purpose and how to align your purpose, or how to align what you're doing with your purpose and how to rekindle that purpose in your business. And then the third thing I want to talk about is one of my favorite topics, one of the biggest barriers to growth, and that's leadership. Building a team and a culture that helps you turn your vision into reality. So in this episode, we're going to cover 3 key things: the CEO doom loop, purpose, and leadership. And all of that is to help you to gear up for the coming year and to find as much momentum, to regain the momentum you've potentially lost in your business. So with that in mind, let's get started with this CEO doom loop. And the way I think about the CEO doom loop is, if you imagine a black hole, the edge of the black hole, there's this event horizon, and any light caught kind of in that event horizon, it's this notional boundary around a black hole beyond which any light or radiation cannot escape. So it's that point of no return. And I think you can get stuck in this kind of CEO doom loop or event horizon without knowing it, and be trapped there for many, many years, even decades, and just kind of hitting your head against a plateau. And the challenge with that is, if you kind of go beyond that point of no return, there is no way of bringing the business back. So if you're stuck in this place at the moment, in the CEO doom loop, and even if you haven't come across this term before, you've probably likely felt the effects. It's this really vicious cycle where many leaders just kind of find themselves working even harder than they've ever worked, and feeling like they're just running in place. You're not finding any traction. You're not finding the momentum you used to have. You're just really stuck where without kind of seeing the revenue go up, the profit go up. You're not moving towards any kind of goals. It just feels like you're going around the block. And what starts happening is that you get more and more involved in the day-to-day operations of the business. So your day is filled with kind of back-to-back meetings, answering emails, putting out fires, issues that just leave you no room for strategic thinking. And, the challenge I see here is that very often business owners want to kind of bring in tools like AI tools just to kind of fill in the calendar and make sure that they're not losing any time along the way. And they equate this with kind of being successful. So they're doing more and more harder and harder work by using these tools to just slot things into their calendar. And I don't think that that's the right approach to dealing with this. I think if anything, you certainly want to be blocking time in your calendar, but you want to be pulling yourself out of doing those day-to-day tasks. You want to be building a team around you who can do those tasks and making sure that you're not getting caught up in the weeds with absolutely no time for strategic thinking, for driving the business forward, for getting out of survival mode. You're right now, if this is what you're experiencing, you're stuck in survival mode. And it's an exhausting cycle where you're just buried in the day-to-day operations. You're constantly reacting to fires and you're struggling to find the time to work on that big picture. And it's because you're kind of helicoptering in all the time. You're dropping in or parachuting in and trying to fix problems in the business. And what's probably going through your head is, I can do this better than somebody else. I might as well just do it myself. And it's the wrong kind of thinking. You need to be building your people up to be able to do it themselves and to empower them to do it themselves. So let's talk about 5 ways that you're actually going to recognize that you're stuck here. Okay, and these are things that I've spoken through with Glenn Dull, and said the episode's going to be down in the links, and a few other folks who've been on the show have kind of echoed similar thoughts and ideas. So the first thing is that your leadership is very reactive. Your decisions are driven by immediate issues, by the fires that you've got to put out, and then they're not driven by your long-term goals anymore. So you're spending more time trying to solve problems than looking at how you're going to create opportunities. And that's what's holding you back from focusing on where your business is going and kind of this long-term direction for the business. And you just keep going around the block with this reactive leadership style. The second big thing is a lack of strategic focus. So if you're spending all your time consumed by operational tasks and answering emails and handling minor sort of crises all the time, you've never got time for the bigger picture, which is the vision, the growth, strategies, and innovation. And a lot of business owners say to me, John, we don't even have the time to look sort of 3 weeks or 3 months down the line, let alone 3 years. And the problem with that is that you're spending all your time focused on putting out the fires, on reactive tasks, buried in email and schedule and all that sort of stuff. And you're not saying no enough to the things that you shouldn't be doing and focusing on your top sort of 3 priorities, and having those priorities aligned with your long-term goal. So if you're discounting the value of vision, of growth strategies, of innovation, that's one of the main reasons that you're just kind of going around the block all the time. And when we talk about this lack of strategic focus, a guest that comes to mind is Richard Bryan, who came back in to take control of a 4th-generation family business, 120 million in revenue, 5 million overdraft, and I think running at a 2 to 3 million loss at the time. And one of the first things that Richard did was one of the first things Richard did was got a mentor and an advisor to help him, but the two of them pushed all of their emails, all of their scheduling, all that kind of stuff off to a VA. So they had time to focus on the real things, the issues that mattered. And would have a quick stand-up meeting with that VA every morning, make sure they dealt with the key things, but then could focus on the business. So I think instead of trying to just slot things into your calendar, think about who you can get to help you, like a VA, to really help you to take some of that stuff off of your plate, so that you can focus on the more important things. So number 1, reactive leadership. Number 2, lack of strategic focus. Number 3, overdependence on you, the leader. So often this happens. It's counterintuitive. You're the center of the business. All the decisions go through you. And this doesn't really this is bad for you, this is bad for the business, this is bad for the value of the business, when everything revolves around you, the business owner. And it makes it hard to kind of delegate effectively. Your people feel unsure of their roles and their responsibilities. And they're waiting for direction for you because they can't go off and do what needs to be done. They're not empowered to do the things that they need to be done. So you need to be conscious of over-dependence on yourself. And very often this is going to show up, or other people in the organization hear it, where I just need to go to insert your name to get confirmation to do this. I need to get this ad approved, insert your name, by John, whoever it is. So that over-dependence on you is one of the kind of key things that is a good sign that you're falling into the CEO doom loop. And the more you're doing that, the more you're helicoptering and the more everything needs to go through you, the more likely you're going to cross across that event horizon. Number 4, frustration and fatigue. You feel stuck, your people feel stuck, you're often experiencing low morale and high people turnover. So I see this often in companies that are kind of going through that CEO doom loop, where what's happening is that the business owner is getting more and more involved in the operations, and the A players, the key people, are starting to leave the business. So if you take a look back at some of the key people that have perhaps left your business recently, how many A players have you lost? And is that a sign that you're potentially slipping into or going beyond the event horizon? And then finally, growth stagnation. You may have been doing really well up to a point, you hit a plateau, and your growth is just stuck and stagnated there. And your business is now focused on survival instead of growth. And this kind of goes back to that over-dependence on you, to you coming in and getting involved in everything, to you not having the time to focus on the strategic direction, no longer having a purpose, and not having the time to focus on growth strategies and particularly innovation. The world evolves very quickly at the moment, so you need to be able to spend time with your team, understand what's going on around you, even if you're operating the business very, very well. What's happening in the environment around you that's stopping you from growing, that's holding you back? So how do you break free from this doom loop? Well, the first thing is self-awareness. It's part of the mindset. You have to become more self-aware, and you have to recognize that you're in this loop, and you need to seek out help. When I talked about Richard Bryan, he came in at 28 years old to take over $120 million business that was in serious trouble and turn it around. And the first thing he did was found somebody to help him. So find somebody to help you to identify those patterns of reactive leadership and the constant firefighting. If you're not seeing it yourself, pull in somebody else to take a look at what's going on there. The next thing is to start prioritizing strategic thinking. And this can start as simply as reading some books on systems that I use, like Metronomics or Scaling Up or EOS, and how you find time and get into this kind of cadence of strategic planning, where you're carving out time for your annual planning, 2 days away, working on the business, your monthly planning, your quarterly planning, your weekly planning, down to having huddles and making sure that everything is lined up, that you're pursuing your purpose and all of your priorities and goals are lined up to that purpose. And we'll talk about purpose next. The second thing is to delegate and to empower your team. You need to be hiring the right people, and you need to shift from doing everything yourself to enabling your team to take ownership. Number 4 is focusing on kind of things that you can control. So being able to say no to certain things, letting go of distractions that are outside of your control, and then really controlling what you have the power to control and directing your efforts to those impactful areas. So making sure that you know what you've got influence over, what you control, focusing your influence there, and making sure that you have an impact when you do those things, and you're not spreading yourself all over the place and too thin. And then number 5 is build a strong leadership team. And we're going to talk about leadership shortly, but basically making sure that you have surrounded yourself with the best people possible. Again, going back to Richard Bryan, he talked about walking into the room and feeling like he was the smartest person in the room when he first got back into the family business. And ultimately, just before he sold, he talked about being the person in the room who was actually the dumbest person in the room. And what he had done is he built up a leadership team who were ultimately all kind of smarter than him in their respective areas. So make sure that you're building or you're surrounding yourself with a strong leadership team. We'll get into that in a bit more. So the top 5 things here, the way that you're going to escape this doom loop as you go into 2025 into the new year. Number 1, recognize that you're in the loop. Find some help, self-awareness. Know that you're going to the loop. Number 2, prioritize your strategic thinking. Make sure you've carved out time to prioritize strategic thinking in the business. Delegate to your team. Make sure that they're empowered to do what they need to do. Coach them. Number 4, focus on the controllable variables, things that you can control in your environment. And make sure that you're taking a look at what's going on in the environment and you're bringing that into the business, and then you're focusing on what you can control. Number 5, make sure you're building a strong leadership team. Okay, so the next big thing is purpose. And this is the kind of one that everybody talks or thinks of as being a bit kind of fluffy and in the clouds. And it's easy to lose sight of why you started your business in the first place. So you may have started your business because you believed that you could do something better. I was talking to Eric Rieger, and he was at a company where the culture changed dramatically. And he honestly believed that he could do this better, that he could create a better environment for his customers, for his employees, for himself. So he went off and he set up his own business. And I want you to kind of go back to thinking about what your core purpose was when you started the business and try and rekindle that purpose, because it is easy to lose sight of why you started in the first place. And many leaders that I kind of work with along the way get caught up in chasing revenue and profitability, just going around the block, kind of doing everything they need to do to keep the business alive, hitting that plateau. And they forget that there was this deeper purpose that actually drove long-term success of the business. And without this core purpose, the reason the business exists, it's really hard to get employees engaged. It's really hard to inspire your customers. And it's difficult to feel fulfilled as a leader yourself. So I want to impress on you that this idea of purpose isn't just a buzzword. One of the great conversations I had on this was with Zach Mercurio, and he talked about it as being the engine that fuels what you got to get done. When you come up with a strategy and you develop all of the priorities and you come up with your plan to execute and you start getting your people working on it, they need a fuel to keep energizing them. And that purpose is what's going to attract the best people to your business. It's what's going to attract your A players. And more importantly, it's what's going to fuel them to do what they need to do. And Zach talks about having an invisible leader. So your purpose is this invisible leader. And I go as far as saying, have a chair at the table with your invisible leader in it, and another one that's got your core customer in it. So all the decisions that you're making, you're kind of keeping in mind at your LT or your leadership table who your core customer is and who that invisible leader is. And every single decision you make, you're starting to filter and you're saying, well, does that align with our core purpose? Does it align with what our core customer is looking for? Now, businesses without a core purpose often struggle with the decision making, with team cohesion, and with customer loyalty. And if you can nail down this core purpose, it really helps you align everything that you're doing with where you're going, and it keeps everybody energized and fueled. And I think about Eric Rieger again, who with Webbit Services, his core purpose, and it's even kind of woven into the business, is about how to close the gap between how to close this growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. So there's this kind of inequality in money, in wealth, this wealth inequality. And the way Eric's doing that is, one, his business is now set up as an ESOP, so an employee stock ownership program. And his employees at the moment own 30% of the business. And by 2030, I believe, he intends to get to a point where the business is entirely employee owned. And what he's trying to achieve there is, by helping the people who helped him to build the business, he's giving back and he's closing that gap. And more importantly, what he's trying to do is serve as a beacon for other businesses. So for his clients, for his suppliers, for people like you listening to this. Instead of taking a big amount out of the business through a sale, he's got private equity folks knocking at the door so he could exit the business, take a chunk of money, spend the rest of his life playing golf, sailing around the world, start another business. Instead, what he's chosen to do is still to take money off the table, but do that through an employee ownership scheme. And in doing that, give back to the folks who've helped him to build a business, and more importantly, act as a beacon for other businesses. So this purpose is so important. And the core purpose for Web Services is to help to close that sort of wealth gap. So how do you recognize, or how do you figure out what to do in terms of your core purpose and how to approach that? So I think the first thing is that your core purpose acts as the North Star for your business. It answers two essential questions, really. One is why your business exists in the first place, and that closely connects with who does it serve, so who's your core customer. And when you get these two things right, and you know exactly who you serve, why your business exists, what you're going to find is that you're actually you're targeting the right core customer, ideal customer, and your value proposition is far more aligned with that core customer. So when you operate with purpose, you create more alignment between where you're going, who your core customer is, and all the priorities that you're building up to get there. And Zach talks about a study from, I think it was Wharton School of Business, where they looked at what was going on at NASA at the time that they were trying to put the astronauts on to the moon. And what they did was they had this kind of ladder to the moon scenario where every single person who worked at NASA had this ladder of how their tasks aligned with the purpose of putting a person onto the moon. Now, if you imagine there's thousands of workers involved in this project who know that at the end of it, they're going to probably lose their jobs. But by having this higher purpose and being involved in something that was quite a remarkable feat back then, and how their tasks aligned with that core purpose, got everybody lined up to put somebody on the moon. And there's a great story, whether it's true or not, about John F. Kennedy walking into NASA and accidentally walking into the janitor's kind of closet, meeting the janitor and asking what he does, and the janitor saying, "I'm here to put a person on the moon." And I think that ties back to this whole idea of how do you sort of make what your employees do more purposeful and connect what they do with a higher purpose. So your employees actually feel connected to a greater mission and something that's bigger than themselves, which is going to drive engagement. It's going to drive performance, and it's going to help customers to kind of connect deeper with your business. They understand what your purpose is, what your core values are, and foster better loyalty. So core purpose, really and really important. It's why you exist, why you're there. Here's 5 things you can do to work on it. Okay, so first of all, number 1, go back and define your core purpose. Create a clear and meaningful reason for why your business exists, and talk about it all the time. Keep putting that message out. For me, for our business, our purpose is creating entrepreneurial freedom. It's taken a number of iterations to get into those 3 words. Everything we do, every decision we make is about, are we helping entrepreneurs find their freedom? So this past podcast, The Freedom Experience, the upcoming book, Finding Freedom, all of these things are lined up with trying to help business owners like you to find the freedom in the business that they set off to find when they started the business. So our core purpose wasn't something that we defined. It took us a while. It took a number of quarters for us to get down to creating entrepreneurial freedom. The second thing is to integrate your purpose into your decisions. So make sure that you're using the purpose as a filter for evaluating strategies and opportunities. As entrepreneurs, very often we have this kind of shiny object syndrome, and we'll go over here and go over there, and we'll find an opportunity, we'll run after it, and it distracts us from our core purpose. And I think that's part of why we lose that core purpose over time. So everything we do in our business, and many of the successful folks who are on this podcast, use that core purpose as a filter for their decision-making process. They make sure that all of the priorities are aligned with that core purpose and that they're using it as a filter to make decisions. Number 3, align your team with the purpose. Make sure that everybody on the team understands their role. Going back to NASA and that ladder, every task you're doing, how do you align you need to align what a person's doing with how it impacts that core purpose. So when you think about what your core purpose is, what your big, hairy, audacious goal is. So for us, big, hairy, audacious goal is serving 1 million entrepreneurs by 2030. And everything that we do over the next 3 years, and everything we do on a kind of quarterly basis, and everything we do on a weekly basis, everything lines up to achieving that purpose. So whether it's running this podcast, improving this podcast, getting new guests on that interesting to you, writing books, creating content, coaching, all of those things are lining up with what we aim to, or what our core purpose is. So that North Star, where we're going, what our big, hairy, audacious goal is right now, which is to serve 1 million entrepreneurs by 2030. And then how we're doing that on a kind of quarterly, annual, monthly, weekly basis, and right down to daily huddles. Are we working on what's important? Are we saying no to the things that we shouldn't be working on? And you want to get your whole team aligned with that purpose and working on what's going to move the needle, rather than running around kind of fighting fires all the time and doing things that are just keeping you stuck. Number 4 is prioritize contribution over achievement. And I mean, really what this is about is shifting the metrics from a focus on revenue to getting focused on how you're making an impact. So shift your focus from revenue metrics only to the impact you're creating. And we kind of look at that in terms of that BHAG of reaching 1 million business owners, and then looking at our metrics in terms of how we are doing that through the podcast, how are we doing that through our masterclasses, how are we doing that through YouTube, LinkedIn. How are we reaching those million folks? And then obviously how we're monetizing it, and whatever the financial metrics are. And then finally, make your purpose tangible. Turn your purpose into something that's measurable in terms of your goals and your actions. And your NASA, again, Eric Rieger, basically looking at how you tie the tasks that everybody's working on to how you to that higher purpose. So those 5 things again. 1, define your purpose. Number 2 is integrate your purpose into every decision. Use it for a filter. Number 3 is make sure that your team is aligned with that purpose. Number 4 is prioritize contribution over achievement. So don't just look at the financial numbers. Look at prioritizing, or shift from that focus on metrics to the impact that you're creating. And then finally, number 5 is making purpose tangible. So turn your purpose into something that's measurable in terms of the goals that you're pursuing. Okay, finally, leadership. This is the number 1 barrier to growth in my mind. So if you can't get your leadership team right, that's probably why you're stuck in that CEO doom loop. And great businesses aren't built by a single person. Great businesses are built by geniuses, by the best people you can find. Now, if I think about Steve Jobs, when he left Apple, he was a genius surrounded by thousands of millions. I always think about Gru and his minions, and Steve Jobs being this genius, and he had all these yes people around him. When he returned to Apple, he decided to build a culture of genius. And that was hiring the best people he could find. And that's echoed by what Richard Ryan said, where he was the smartest person in the room when he joined the business. When he left, he felt like the dumbest person in the room. And that's where you want to get to as the business owner. You want to surround yourself with the smartest people you can find. And without the right people in the right seats, the business is going to plateau. So it's not just about finding the right people, it's making sure they're in the right seats. And if you aren't doing that, you're going to plateau and they're going to become bottlenecks. And a lot of this ties back to overdependence as well, where you have a salesperson or a technical person on your leadership team. So maybe a leadership team of 3, 4, even potentially 2, yourself and this person that you're over reliant on, the salesperson, the technical person. They don't fit the culture well, and they're actually holding the business back. But you can't think of how to exist without them. So you have to figure out a plan. And one of your first priorities should be removing all of the overdependence from your business. Building a leadership team that's made up of the best people you can find, not the people that are holding you back. And it's not just about hiring A players. It's about creating this culture where your A players can thrive, where your whole company, every employee in your company feels valued, they feel heard, they feel cared about, and they're empowered to take ownership. If you're not empowering them to take ownership, if they don't feel valued, heard, and cared about, then you're building a culture that's doomed to fail. So leadership's about setting the vision and empowering others to achieve it. That's what it fundamentally comes down to. And that's why having that purpose, that vision is so important. That's what's going to pull you out of the CO doom loop. Make sure you've got the right people to kind of command that ship and get you away from the doom loop. Make sure you've got the people with the skills who are able to do that. And it requires trust, collaboration, and kind of a shared commitment to what your company's values are. So I think owners who fail to empower their teams are the ones who face the high turnover, low morale, and missed opportunities. And you don't want to be in that position as you go into the new year. Try and get out of that. On the other hand, companies that have engaged employees, have aligned teams, outperform their competitors. So how do you kind of build the right leadership team? Well, it starts with, first of all, evaluate what you got at the moment. You ask yourself, would I enthusiastically rehire the people on my current leadership team? If not, you've got some decisions to make there. Don't sit on the fence. Make those decisions now. Go into the new year thinking about, how am I going to make a replacement here? Where would this person work better in the organization, maybe? Is this the right person for this leadership team? Would I enthusiastically rehire them, or could they better serve somewhere else? So that's number one, evaluate your leadership team. Number two, make sure, starting with yourself, that there's a willingness to change. If that willingness isn't there, you're never going to get this right. So for your leadership team to really kind of truly rock, there must be a desire and a willingness to evolve and to grow. And that means going to conferences, reading books, embracing a new system, to really have this ability to kind of be self-aware, to know that their glass is only half full, and to want to grow. Jack Stack famously said this, you gotta want it. And I think if there's not this gotta want it, this willingness to change, unfortunately, you're doomed to get sucked into that black hole. Number three, define your core values. Get clear on these. It might take a little while. Make sure you haven't got any rubbish like integrity and par for the core stuff, trust, all that kind of crap in there, because those are the kind of values that should be there anyway. Work on the values that are really kind of buried in your business already, buried somewhere in your organization. You just need to uncover them. And there's some great exercises to do this. I'll put it into the show notes. There's like Jim Collins' Mission to Mars, where you think about opening an office on Mars. Who are the people in your business that you'd send to do that, who kind of exhibit the qualities to make this a success? And Tom Walter, who was on some months ago, and I'll put him into the show notes, talked about how he had this command and control style of running the business, Tasty Catering. At the time, they were somewhere around 2 or 3 million, I think, and in a very difficult position because Tom had just built or just acquired a building, and he really needed some of the younger leaders on the team who happened to walk in his office and said, Tom, we've had enough. We're leaving unless you change. So Tom had a change, and part of that change was developing the core values for Tasty Catering. And I think there's around 7 core values, so more than usual. But those 7 core values form the guidelines for how everybody operates. And Tom summed this up perfectly during the COVID time, saying, I had 60 CEOs in that business who were driving home every night thinking about how to make tasty catering work. And those core values are so entrenched that every decision they make in that business, everything they do, goes through this filter of core values. And fundamentally, the proof is in the pudding here. This is a company with a very strong core purpose, very strong core values, went from 3 million to, I think, a group of companies of 85 million at the moment. And that story was not uncommon through just about everybody I've interviewed, where they have a clear sense of purpose and strong core values. They go from a few million to hundreds of millions in some cases. And I want you to just step back and think about this. I want you to think about where you're at in terms of your core purpose, where you are in terms of your core values, and make sure that you do some work on that as you go into the new year. Number 4, invest in emotional intelligence. You don't just want super bright people. You want people who can nurture leaders, who can excel at communication, who can build cohesive teams, that have empathy and are good at relationship building. As the CEO, you need to be coaching the team, and your leadership needs to be doing the coaching as well. You need to find people with empathy, people who have high emotional intelligence. So think about your existing team in that context as well. And then finally, celebrate the wins and learn from your failures. Use the wins to kind of energize you towards your purpose, and use the failures equally to energize you. Like, okay, we tried that. What's next? And I think of somebody like Elon Musk, where he's got that cyber car like him, or like the cyber car, wherever you sit on this. But he's has a rock or something thrown at the window, and it's supposed to be, I guess, bulletproof, and the window smashes. And he's like, okay, well, guess we better be working on that then. So there are these failures, and it's about how you handle them. And he's kind of energized to go off and fix that failure. Paul Spiegelman, who I interviewed, went through the process of getting Beryl Health ready to sell, talked to a private equity company, and ultimately didn't do the deal with a private equity company. Instead of looking at that as a failure, he identified in his business the gaps that needed to be fixed those, and ultimately did a strategic exit at a much higher valuation and a much higher multiple. So celebrate the wins, learn from the failures. Those 5 things that I want you to do as you go into the new year. Evaluate your leadership team. Do they want to change? Is there this willingness to change? Number 2, make sure you know what your core values are and your core purpose. Invest in people with high emotional intelligence, and celebrate the wins and the failures likewise. Good. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Something slightly different. This podcast started off with solo, with kind of solo episodes, and I think if I look back, some of those solo episodes have performed really well. So I wanted to do the sum up, particularly the one on procrastination did amazingly well being in here as well. But I wanted to, as you go into the new year, I wanted to help you to think about breaking free from the CEO doom loop. I think what is going to help you is having the kind of invisible leader, the purpose that's going to pull you away from that event horizon, from being sucked into the black hole. That building your A-player leadership team is going to help you to kind of pull away from that. So if you imagine the spaceship, you're sitting on the edge, you figure out what your core purpose is, like Earth, whatever it is, and then having the people on that ship who are experts in what they got to do to pull you away, engineering, navigation, whatever they are. So make sure that as you go into the new year, thinking about it. If you're stuck in that platter, how do I escape the doom loop? How do I find that North Star for my business, that core purpose that is going to pull us away, is going to pull us to where we want to go, and do I have the right people to get me there? If you found today's conversation valuable, I'd be really grateful if you'd leave a review on the platform that you're listening to. I mean, this podcast is one of my top priorities for the coming year. I've told you about how it ties into that core purpose of mine, and I want to make it the best I can for you. So your feedback helps me to improve. Your reviews help me to get the show in front of more entrepreneurs who could benefit from the guests and the insights that come through from this podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. In our next episode, I'm going to go a little bit deeper with 3 other big learnings that I'm hoping are going to help you to do what you need to do and to regain momentum or find momentum in the coming year. Thanks very much. Hey, thanks for tuning into this week's edition of The Freedom Experience. And it's been a pleasure bringing this content to you. If you find value in today's show, I'd truly appreciate it if you could take just a moment to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps others to find the show, and it supports our mission to help business owners like you. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode filled with strategies and insights that'll help you scale your business with purpose. And for more information on anything we discussed, or if you're ready to start accelerating your business growth with ease, with speed, and with confidence, check out the link in the show notes below. There you'll learn more about our coaching and our mastermind programs. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you next time on The Freedom Experience.